Bonjour à tout le monde. I will speak in English because we have some guests who doesn't speak French, and I think it was planned to have this session in English. Thank you very much for coming to this session where we will talk about human rights defender with a person from the FIR, and I will let in 2 minutes Mary introduce and present what is the FIR and why we are organizing this session this morning. Thank you to the Academy who is welcoming us again this morning to talk about this important topic on the protection of environment defenders. And I think it will be we are very lucky to have two persons with us that I will introduce briefly. Mary Lawlor, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on Defenders. It's a global mandate that covers all defenders in the countries that belong to the United Nations, but Mary will be able to tell us a little bit more about her mandate. And we are lucky as well to have Michel Forst, who is the UN Special Rapporteur as well on environment defender in the framework of the Aarhus Convention that has been ratified by France, and that will also be able to explain you a little bit what is his mandate about. But before I ask a question to our guest, I will let Mary say a few words about why we are here today.
Thank you, Eleonore. Thank you to everyone to be there this morning. So as you know, COP29 will start at Baku in a few days. And this one of the key challenges is to continue to plan the good mechanism for a just transition, and more broadly to conciliate biodiversity, climate and social issues. And so in this context, environmental rights defenders that could be small-scale farmers, indigenous communities, or youth, but the speaker will explain us better just after, must be integrated into transition strategy decisions. And on this occasion, on the occasion of meetings in Paris of representatives of human rights, environmental rights defenders in Paris this week, we are really happy to organize this brief with FIDH and French CIF. So the French CIF is a French Sustainable Investment Forum that group and gather the responsible investor community. So we are really happy to present and to discuss, to present and environmental rights defender globally and in national context, but also to discuss the importance of meaningful consultation and the reputational and financial risk potentially for responsible investors when there is a violation of against rights. So thank you everyone, and I will let Eleonore introduce speakers.
Yes, and just to strengthen what you say, this meeting is really organized ahead of the COP29 that will take place in Baku in Azerbaijan. And as a civil society organization, we are very worried about what is happening in Baku, because some defenders have already been arrested, including one defending environmental rights. So we were also gathered for 2 days here in Paris to launch an appeal to the government, to the private sector, to the institution, to make sure that environmental defenders will be able to attend this COP29 without any problem. And in this appeal we ask for two things. One, to protect the environmental defenders, and Michel will explain you why it's important to protect them. And the second issue that maybe is even more of interest for you is to make sure that their voice is well heard and that they will be able to attend COP29 or any global negotiation on climate, because as you will see, they are the first victim of this climate change, and their voice needs to be heard before taking any decision concerning them. So maybe my first question will be to you, Michel. If you could maybe briefly explain what is your mandate and give us a definition of who are the human rights defenders fighting for environment, and what are the obstacles they are facing in their daily work and in their fight to protect the environment.
Thank you, Eleanor. That's a good question. I mean, to start with a clear definition of what we're speaking about. At the UN, states have adopted in 1998 what we call the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, with a clear definition in Article 1 of this of defenders. In fact, they are individual groups and organs of society who are protecting and promoting human rights as a whole. That's a very clear definition. You don't need to belong to an organization or a union to be a defender. Anyone protecting and promoting human rights are human rights defenders. And this broad definition includes different categories of defenders, in fact, but they are all part of the big family of defenders that this declaration aimed to protect in 1998. And of course, when you read the report by the mainstream organizations working on human rights, like Global Witness, FIDH, Amnesty, Frontline Defenders and others, you will see that many of those defenders are currently under severe attacks by states and by companies. And amongst those who are suffering the most, there are environmental defenders. So environmental defenders are human rights defenders who are fighting to protect and to promote the right to a safe and enabling environment. And mostly those people have not decided to become environmental defenders. They became defenders out of a necessity, in fact, because their immediate environment has been under severe attacks by either states that want to develop new activities or by companies wanting to develop their own activities in the region. And then those defenders simply come together, decide to defend the right to a safe and enabling environment, and they become, in fact, defenders. So that's important to have a clear understanding of those defenders, because currently they are under severe attacks by many actors, by, of course, security forces, by states, by companies, simply because they are trying to defend peacefully their environment. And those people currently are called eco-terrorists by many ministers, members of parliament. They are called green Talibans. They are called different names, while they are simply people trying to defend and to protect their environment. They are peasants. They are leaders of communities. They are indigenous people in their regions that try simply to defend their ecosystem, the place where they live, which are currently under severe attacks by many actors, very often under the guise of the green transition. And we see more and more currently attacks on those communities, on those defenders. Just coming back from Cali, from the COP Biodiversity, where I met with a large number of those people who are simply trying to raise their voice with states, raise the voice with the UN to say we need more protection, we need more inclusion, we need to be more involved in the global discussion that currently are taking place in those international fora where we are not invited to sit at the table, while at the same time it's our environment, our daily life, which is being discussed by powerful states. So that's why we also need to come together to think on how we could protect those defenders. And not to be too long, but my mandate has been recently created inside the Aarhus Convention that you know, I guess, convention that has been adopted in 1998 by 46 states plus the EU. Important to say that the EU is a party to the Aarhus Convention, and because states have understood that there are increasing attacks against environmental defenders, they have decided to create a new mandate, a new mechanism, a sort of rapid response mechanism to respond immediately to the needs expressed by those defenders to be better protected by states. So my mandate covers the 46 countries plus the EU, and I'm receiving complaints coming from those defenders The aim of this mandate is to protect them through different means, and I'm using the same tools and working methods as all of the other special rapporteurs. That is when we receive an allegation of threats by either a company or a state, we send what we call allegation letters to states or to companies, and then they have 60 days to reply to our allegation. It's not accusation. We simply inform companies or states that we have received allegations of threats, and we ask the company or the state to comment on those allegations and to investigate eventually, and then to reply in writing to our allegations. The aim of our mandate is to protect defenders by also following up on any, using different tools and methods. We don't have time to present more in detail. Mary probably will also speak on her activity. In addition to the work that I'm doing currently inside the 46 country, to receive complaints and to speak with states and companies inside the 46 countries, the mandate and also the possibility to also intervene outside of the 46 countries in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, in the MENA region, when companies based in one of the countries which has ratified the Arhus Convention is operating abroad, and through their contractors, subsidiaries or investors are threatening, harassing, sometimes also killing defenders outside the 46 countries. So currently we do receive complaints coming from defenders outside Europe. Recently we had 2 consultations, one in Africa and the other one in Bogota in Latin America, where we invited defenders and we chose to invite defenders that were facing threats from companies based in Europe specifically. And in our consultations in Africa and Latin America, we got names, in fact, from those big companies operating in Latin America, in Africa, and were perceived by those defenders as being really responsible for the attacks against their communities. And next year we'll do additional consultations in Africa and in Asia to gather more testimonies, more information, try also to alert companies and states on how they could also develop new toolkits, new plans of action to better protect defenders, and most importantly to also prevent the attacks to occur, because we see that of course prevention is much more useful than protection. So that's on the mandate. The last point is that as I said, the EU is a party itself to the convention, which means that all EU institutions are bound by the provision of the convention. And if we take, for instance, the EU, the European Investment Bank, when they fund project or develop project, they are also responsible. And if I receive complaints by which I would have allegation that the European Investment Bank is also bound by, is also responsible for attacks or threats to defenders, then I would have the possibility also to speak not only to the companies but also to the investors. Hopefully I responded to all your questions.
Yes, thank you, Michel. I'm sure there will be many other questions regarding the role company can play and investor in this area. Mary, you have been in touch with defenders for a very long time now, including human rights defenders protecting environment. We know that it's very important for them to be able to attend negotiation forum where their difficulties and where the environment will be discussed, but they are facing obstacles to attend this negotiation. So could you maybe remind us why it's important for them to be present to the global negotiation on climate? What are the obstacles they are facing, and what can we do today to support them, and including what can company do or investor do today to make sure that these people will be able to participate to the decision that will affect them?
Hello everybody, and it's good to be here, and thank you all for coming. I suppose none of you would like decisions taken on your behalf, and so too for the communities who are affected by the negative impacts of companies in their communities, where they can be killed even. I mean, 1 in 2 defenders working on the environment since 2015 has been, they've been killed because they've been working on issues in the environment, for the environment, which is a very stark statistic, because there are over 300 killings of human rights defenders a year. And killings are the tip of the iceberg because they are also subjected to many other attacks, as threats, smears, massive numbers of cases where defenders are being arrested, detained, and baselessly prosecuted, very long periods of pre-trial detention and long-term sentences. And if you don't have the people whose lives, whose daily lives are being affected in the room when decisions are being taken about things that affect them, then it is not proper participation. And it's like a bunch of people like us, say, all in this room deciding on what's best for something we know nothing about. Because the reality is, unless you live their lives, unless you see the impact in their communities, unless you see how they struggle to have clean water, not polluted, how they struggle not to be displaced off their land, where they're subsistence farmers, where they grow crops and they live by what they eat, you know, where their forests are being cut down in, and it affects their ecosystem. It seems so sensible to involve them, and yet they're kept out of the room. And for us, it is really important that the link particularly to business is explored. I was recently in Brazil on a country visit, and there I met so many defenders who have been affected by extractive mining, by gold and bauxite, and by illegal logging, and by, you know, river pollution, and there's so many other things. And these people, their voices aren't heard. They're just seen as if they're like, you know, mosquitoes to be swatted away. And they are people who are just trying to live their lives on their on their land in the same way that they have been doing for centuries. When we come to business, for give you an example, you were all aware of the ECOP a pipeline being developed by Total in Uganda and in Tanzania. And we have been raising cases with Total and the French government and the Ugandan government since 2020, raising concerns about human rights defenders being attacked, for raising concerns about the environmental and human rights and climate impacts of the project. Huge numbers of peaceful protesters have been violently arrested and put on trial. Students have been arrested when they've tried to deliver petitions to the parliament about the pipeline. Journalists have been targeted for meeting with locals and gathering testimony. And this year, one defender from the oil field that will feed the pipeline was abducted and forcibly disappeared by the Ugandan military before being found days later at the side of the road, very badly beaten. So we've been raising these cases, but no action has been taken by any of the actors involved to try and prevent these attacks or actually listen to the defenders and the concerns. And we all know that it is the state's duty to protect human rights, but it is the company's duty and the business duty to respect human rights. And that is where business is falling down. And this is where investors come in. As you know, investors cannot, in my view, just sit back, because they share part of the responsibility for their investment They really need to do their due diligence before they invest. And we know that some banks now are starting to take this seriously, creating databases and indicators on risks for defenders. The Norwegian State Pension Fund has created formal expectation for companies it invests in to adopt zero tolerance policies for retaliation against people raising human rights and environmental concerns about their projects and operations, and we need to see more of that. And I spoke very recently to one major European bank who are creating a set of internal indicators to flag areas of risks for human rights defenders. And this is a very good practice. So we need investors to be pushing these issues with companies. Investors have leverage, obviously, and we really think it would be a really great difference that they could make. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. You anticipated a little bit the question I wanted to ask you, but I will come back to this question. But Michel, I wanted to ask you, and Mary, you could also respond, about the SLAP action, because we have seen that this is something that is being more and more used by companies against individuals or human rights defenders, environment defenders. Could you tell us a little bit about this, because I think it's really part of our reflection today.
Yeah, in addition to the what I said about the campaigns of defamation against environmental defenders, we see in many places an increasing number of attacks to communities, to organizations, to defenders, using what we call the SLAPs, strategic litigations against public participation. That is by which a company would decide to sue an individual organization requesting huge funds to pay for compensation for defamation. In fact, the companies would argue that their names has been defamed by campaigns launched by organizations, and they request the court to sentence the organizations and individuals requesting huge sums of funding. And that's something that we see increasingly in many countries, and more companies are using these new forms of attacks against defenders to shut the mouth, if I may say so, of those organizations, and simply to shut those organizations. In fact, we see that the matter has been raised by the EU. A recent new directive has been adopted by the EU on the anti-SLAPP directive, which is the basis, and now it needs to be implemented by governments, transposed in domestic legislations. That's the basis. We need to have more than what the directive is currently saying. We have also a very good work done by the Council of Europe that has decided to develop not only recommendations, but also a set of principles that would guide companies when decided or not to sue an individual or a group. And this set of new criteria needs to be better understood by companies before deciding to sue an individual or a group. That's clearly a new forms of attacks against those communities and those defenders, and we need to find ways to protect them from bad behavior from companies. Sometimes those companies will also use legal firms, very costly legal firms, and would, in addition to the sums that they request the court to decide, of course, the organizations and the victims would bear the cost of the proceedings, which is an additional burden for those organizations. And currently, we have names of those organizations that come to us, to Mary, to me, to my mandate, to our mandate, to seek for legal support in those actions.
Thank you, Michel. Actually, it's a very frightening procedure that are more and more used, including for our member organization working in the South, that may face this type of slap action. Mary, I just had a question before we hand over the discussion to the room. You mentioned a good practice that you have with investors, with Banque Publique, to start a dialogue with them and make sure that that they will be responsible in the way they invest. Do you have any other good practices that you have heard about with company that you could share with us? Do you think of any practices that you have encountered, or maybe Michel, if you have any?
I mean, there are a number of companies that take their responsibilities very seriously, just as there are a number of investors that take their responsibilities very seriously. When it comes to companies, I can think of, for example, Adidas has adopted a policy on human rights defenders. These are the people I work for. I should have said that, but my mandate is to try and protect people who are working peacefully for the rights of others in accordance with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other standards. And they are always at risk, the ones that I work for. So Adidas, as I was saying, they have adopted a policy on human rights defenders. They have raised cases in the country where there has been a violation in the context of business, because so many of these violations take place in the context of business, extractive mining, particularly land issues, land indigenous environment issues. So they have gone, not only do they have the policy, but they've also started to raise the cases informally with the government. Unilever has adopted a specific policy and guidance for the company in how they work with human rights defenders and how to include them. And I think what companies don't get is that human rights defenders aren't anti-development, and they're not, they're not automatically against everything. As they're called awkward and they're called all sorts of names because they just want to try and ensure that they can continue basically living or farming their land. So if at least the companies would really put in place this free, prior and informed consent, it would really be good. I heard of a place in Thailand where the company involved was, they wanted to do some extractive stuff in the middle of a small village, but in that small village there was what the community felt was a sacred well. So the company shut down its operations. It dialogued with the community for 6 months. They all agreed that the company would create a space, a little park, where the well would be moved. And in that dialogue, and then they had a solemn procession for the moving of the well, and everybody was happy. The company got what it wanted. The villagers felt that they were listened to, and that that it was acceptable. The other good practices, I mean, there are not very many, to be honest, because as we all know, companies are driven by their shareholder interests and things like that. But you can see some good practice, such as those two. There are others, but they're more they're smaller companies. They're companies who have it built into their DNA that they're going to abide by the principle of do no harm.
Thank you, Mary. Michel, you wanted to add a few words?
Yes, just in addition to what Mary was saying, we see, in fact, actually more and more companies wanted or willing to do more to better understand what they could do to protect or to prevent the attacks against defenders to occur. So our mandates have been established not only, not to name and shame companies, but also to provide support, if needs be, to companies that sometimes were called, so to provide comments on new developments by companies. Recently, we have been involved by the Consumer Good Forum to provide inputs, comments on a toolkit that they are trying to develop for the network of their companies. We are currently also working to make sure that there will be also a strong statement by CEOs of those companies explaining that nothing should be done in our name, that is no attacks against defenders should occur against in our name. That's something also that we would love to develop with others. So we are also available if needs be, if your companies would like to work with our staff or with ourselves to work more on the development of guidance tool or toolkits for your companies, it's more than welcome. The problem that we see sometimes is that companies developed at the level of the headquarters good documents, good tools, good toolkits, good guidance tool, but it's sometimes not really implemented by the companies in the region, in fact, by contractors, by subsidiaries, and sometimes we see that the reporting line between the subsidiaries and the headquarters is not properly done. So, and that's something that we also need to follow up and to make sure that companies would not only develop those guidance tools, but also investigate on how they are really implemented in country, at country levels, to make sure that it's properly implemented. What we see is that when companies would receive what we call this allegation letter, by which we convey a message to the company saying that we have received an allegation of threats, many companies are surprised. They don't understand what we are doing. So sometimes they would call us for a meeting to better understand what they could do, what they should do. And sometimes they simply don't respond properly, simply say that the matter is currently dealt with their lawyers, they will come back to us later on, and they never respond. So that's a bad behavior, in fact. So the good response is to immediately respond, saying we actually reception of your letter and will respond properly. We will investigate ourselves in your allegations and come back to you with clear responses on what has been done, and we could then follow up with them to make sure that things have been properly implemented. We have also good news, good experiences with companies. We don't have time to give examples, but in the work that we are doing, we also see that companies take seriously our letters and do proper work to investigate and to sometimes also redress when they note that their behavior has not been adequate.
I just wanted to I just remembered. I don't know if you're all aware of the Investor Alliance for Human Rights, but that is a group of investors who have come together to ensure that their investments are ethical. And then there was a statement put out by about 40 companies, and Michael, maybe you can help me here. This was ahead of the new directive on human rights and environmental due diligence, where the companies supported it. Am I right? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Mary. And I'm sorry, I realized I didn't introduce myself. So I'm Eleonore Morel, and I am the CEO of the FIDH, which is the International Federation for Human Rights, which is co-organizing this event with the FIR. I will let the room now for questions. So if people online or in the room, you have any question to ask to our guests, please, the floor is yours.
Hello, Gregory Schneider-Monory, Défi Impact and University Paris Sorbonne, Paris Nord, sorry. Just a question, well, first, thanks for the presentation. Question about how to connect these threats and these attempts on life life attempts on human rights defenders to companies. And then the sub-question is, would it be possible to connect these cases or to follow up these cases to the OECD national contact points, or is there a possibility for international NGOs as you are to build up an international contact point for human rights cases?
It is very difficult, I accept, to connect at local level the threats or attacks or killings of human rights defenders working for the environment with companies, because companies use quite a lot of different tactics, shall we say. In some cases, they're in league with corrupt governments, and the government may provide private security that doesn't act according to standards. In some cases, it's local, corrupt officials. In other cases, there's hired thugs by the company. There was a very emblematic case in Honduras where a human rights defender, Bertha Cáceres, was murdered, and after the reason I say it was so unusual is that the perpetrators were finally brought to justice, which included 8 people from the company. So it is very difficult, and it is something that we all in this room struggle with, trying to find the actual connection. Also, companies use their structures, to, I suppose, hide, or to hide behind their structures, to say it's nothing to do with them. I mean, I'm appointed by the UN Human Rights Council to be the rapporteur on human rights defender, and my job is to try and prevent and protect the attacks and protect human rights defenders against attack. Same sort of tools, limited mandate, a lot of allegation letters to the state responsible and the company responsible, getting their feedback and documenting cases and trying to get information. So that's basically, and speaking, or orally speaking to governments and to companies as much as I can. And so they're my tools. So when it comes to the contact point, I think we have to use everything. This is a huge problem. We're not just talking about a few people here and there, even though that would be a few too many. We're talking about systematic violation of the rights of human beings who are simply trying to live their life on their land or protect their communities from attack, and non-violently, and in doing so, they find themselves under attack. At the very least, it's horrible smear campaigns, and at the worst, it's murder. So, it is, as I said, it is a huge problem. So, I would advocate for any kind of mechanism. Because we need all of us. We need you, we need Michel, we need me, we need all the civil society organizations here that are documenting at local level and bringing information out to the international community. So the contact point would be another avenue.
And I would also add that before we decide with our staff to send those letters of allegations to companies, we do also a long work of ourselves investigating those allegations. That is to check the information to make sure that organizations based close to the communities affected by the project will also be informed. So we receive not only allegations coming from one individual or one group, but also we ask sometimes local organizations to investigate themselves and to provide additional material. And if we send precisely those allegation letters and not accusation, it's precisely because we have received serious allegations and we simply ask the company to investigate itself. And that's their duty also, to make sure that their contractors, security force that they use to protect their local branches are also not misusing the mandate that they receive. So it's a request coming from us to company to investigate and then to respond to us. Yes, we have investigated and there's nothing more to say. And then we could continue discussing with the company, saying we have received additional material that will prove that we are serious in our allegations. Of course, when companies are using slabs, that's obvious because there's a legal action taken by the company against individuals. So that's a clear link. But for the rest, that's simply we're asking companies to be serious and to take seriously our allegations.
Thank you. And maybe to complete this response, the FIDH, together with another organization called Organisation Mondiale contre la Torture, is running an observatory on defenders. And each year we issue between 200 and 300 appeal urgent that are public and that very often can also concern companies. And before, of course, issuing this urgent appeal, we are verifying our sources and make sure that the allegation is based on true facts. So it's another way of showing the link between the violation of the company and human rights.
Sorry, and I do think there's plenty of information out there. It's a case of knowing where to look.
Thank you. I just would like to continue on this question of identification. Is it possible to say or explain if there is some riskiest areas at the moment? If we can identify where are the riskiest area and why, and with which sectors of activities is linked, and what are the tools to identify those areas, if it's possible?
Well, I'll start. You can. The riskiest areas are land, indigenous, and environment. That's where the most attacks happen to human rights defenders, from threats, arbitrary detention, long-term sentences, and even murders. So they're the riskiest areas. But they happen everywhere. Traditionally, more in Latin America, but we have documented attacks against human rights defenders working in the context of business and human rights for the environment. Environmental human rights defenders all over the world, in every region of the world. So it's not just something confined to one area, though the majority of the cases are in Latin America. And as I said, having been in Brazil, having been up in the Amazon, it breaks my heart to see what is being done up there, and it can only get worse because the land, the country is so colossal and so huge and so so pristine, and it has so much, possibility for extractive mining. So we met so many communities who have been displaced along the river. We met indigenous communities. We met Quilombola communities. We visited sites of massacres. We saw people who were in danger for their lives. We saw the particular risks to women human rights defenders. We saw land invasions by big farmers. We just saw everything, but it'll only get worse unless action is being taken by those who are going to do some sort of cooperation on extractive mining or of some kind, and because there's just so many minerals and trees and everything there. So I'll hand over.
Yes, what we are doing, Mary and myself, as special rapporteurs, is not simply to sit in our office and to send allegation letters. We travel a lot, in fact. We are traveling to many countries, try to meet with as many defenders as possible to get a sense of what they feel, what their experiences in terms of threats, and that's how we based our assessment of the situation. Myself, when I started with the mandate 2 years ago, I decided to do sort of tour consultations with defenders. We started with a first consultation in Europe, in the north of Europe, in Norway, where we invited Samis from Finland, Sweden, Norway to meet with us. We also invited Inuits from Greenland to be part of the discussion, and we see that including in Europe, those threats are happening and they are linked clearly to companies. Most interesting was that the Samis spoke also of the fact that indigenous people in Peru were also facing the same threats by the same companies. That is, we have the same company operating in Peru and in the north of Europe, threatening indigenous people but by different means. So they are all also connected with what we call the green transition, and that's something which is a matter of concern for us because we see that in the search of new responses to the climate change, companies are trying to find new activities or to develop new activities linked to the green transition, finding rare earth, establishing new wind farms in countries, and then when decided to develop those new activities, also investing in places that belong to indigenous people and then threatening them. That is interesting also to understand.
And that's the easiest thing. Sorry, if you find communities whose voices aren't heard and who are already living outside, I suppose, outside sort of on the margins of society, it's easy always to put stuff there because they're not listened to. Often they don't speak the language, all sorts of obstacles in their way.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Maybe from the people who are online or in the room?
Lionel Brun from Préfond, which is a pension fund for public agents in France. Thanks for your presentations. One of the interests of the national contact points of the OECD is that it comes to conclusion in specific cases, and for us it gives the opportunity to have objective production of international law, even though it's of course many difficulties. How can we use your work in this way? I suppose once you've sent the allegation letters, then you do not systematically issue the results of the exchange with the companies, or is there a way to use, because for example the OECD has a database on which we can find the resolution of the cases, and so that's available for us. Thank you.
Well, when I went to the Norwegian Pension Fund, they had a general human rights policy, but they had nothing on human rights defenders. So they said they would have to go through their process, which they did. It said take a year, which it did. But now what we do with them is, if there is a company that they're investing in that we happen to know about, and we wouldn't know about them all, obviously, but if we see that it is a company that they have invested in or are investing in that has some dodgy practices or awful practices, I should say, then we contact them to just alert them. There is a public database of all the communications that we send, and you can find them on my website, which is srdefenders.org, or there's a link. Michael, is there a link to the communications there? Yeah, there's a link to the communications there. So you can see the responses as well as the allegations.
Yeah. And same with my mandate. They're also on the web page of my mandate. There's clearly all the letters sent by the mandate to either companies or states, and then the responses coming from the state of other companies. So that's a material that they can use, of course, that can use. It has been also developed to be public, so that organizations, also companies, and the UN could also use the information contained in our letters and the responses from states and from companies.
But they get 2 months
Yeah.
to respond. So you have to wait.
Merci. Je crois qu'il y a une question en ligne. Si la personne veut se présenter et poser sa question.
Yes, Jean-Bernard Haute speaking from CAVP, which is a French pension fund for pharmacists. It is more a personal question of about first. Thanks a lot for your for this meeting and for this meeting about human rights and defenders. There is another elephant in the room for Azerbaijan. It is human rights in Azerbaijan itself, and like Anar Mammadli, which is a politician, which an Azerbaijani politician, who is in jail. There is also a former minister, Ruben Vardanyan, from Karabakh, who is also in jail in Azerbaijan. And I think that FIDH, Human Rights Watch, and Amnesty International are aware and are working on this subject. And there is dozens of prisoners of war of Armenian which are in the jails of Azerbaijan. So I would like to know, may you say us a few words about this this subject of human rights, which are not available in Azerbaijan, and do you know if there is some mobilization also of investors about these subjects? Thanks a lot. I know that it is not exactly the subject of the meeting, but it is very connected with it.
Yes, I will try to respond briefly. We know that the situation in Azerbaijan is very complicated with civil society and with the arrest of at least 10 human rights defenders recently. This is also the reason why yesterday we had a press conference to raise this case and remind that the COP that will take place in Baku needs really our attention, because we know that the civic space is very restricted there, and we are of course worried for the people first, if they will be able to go there, and when they come back from their country, how they will be treated. So this is something we have in mind at the FIDH. This is something as well that our special rapporteur are very much aware about, and of course we are following the case you mentioned. So I don't know if Michel or you want to add anything, or Mary, we know that it's not the right space to have this.
Just to say that we follow Azerbaijan. We've taken up a lot of cases in Azerbaijan of human rights defenders, not all involved in work for the environment, but in the case of Anar Mammadli, he was trying to use the COP, as you know, to highlight the violations against human rights defenders in Azerbaijan. He started off with smearing and then ended up in jail, I think on some tax evasion charges or something like that. But anyway, so the mandate continues to take up cases and document them. We have to investigate them, obviously, to make sure that they're accurate, because we can't have our reputations destroyed by taking up inaccurate material. But we have lots of links with human rights defenders in Azerbaijan, and we continue to take up the cases when they send them to us. We rely on organizations like FIDH or Amnesty or Frontline or any of the other organizations or local regional groups to send us information. So the networks of human rights defenders you will always find in each country who will provide you with information, and then you have to check it out to make sure it's accurate and then write the allegation letter to the government who in the case of Azerbaijan, they do respond quite frequently.
We have also, in my mandate, sent a letter to the government of Azerbaijan on the case of Mamadi, and because the case is serious, we also decided to go public on the case, and there will be a statement from my mandate on Mamadi that will be issued in Laetitia in a couple of minutes. Yeah. So the statement will be public on the website and available to anyone on the situation in Azerbaijan.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Merci Michel. Est-ce qu'il y a une autre dernière question peut-être pour nos invités? Sorry, I spoke in French. Is there any last question for our guest? Okay. So.
Maybe as an investor or representative of the investor community, I would like to know if the NGOs that are represented here have further questions to the investor community, and notably to the responsible investor community.
Good place to start. So we are not NGOs, but in my case, I would be more than willing to continue discussion with you and to explore how this mandate could also help you to identify good ways, good methods to protect defenders and to also prevent the attacks to occur. So I'm at disposal.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I think we will close this meeting. I think what really is important from what you said, both of you, is that environment defenders are really, most of the time, they are people like you and I. They will have to face suddenly a situation in their life where they will be affected by a decision regarding their environment and a decision that will affect them directly. And because of this, they will be engaged in a long process and difficult process to make sure that their right will be heard. And for some of them, things will be okay because they will have access to information and they will be able to express themselves. But we have seen that for most of them, it will be a very difficult challenge and situation where they will face threats, where they will face, some of them will be arrested, will be charged for terrorism or whatever. And that this is a responsibility of all of us who are part of this planet and of this humanity, to make sure that these people who wants to make sure that their voice will be heard, will get the support from us as a citizen, as member of community, and that whatever happened to them could also happen to us, and that being part of this community, we really need to be in support of the work and of their commitments, including investors. So thank you very much, and thank you for attending this session.